and so I should hit record right now. The recording is in the portal for all of you who are in the Mystic Society. But this is also the one time a month when we open the doors to the Mystic Society, and anybody who wants to come in and be a part of this conversation is welcome to come. This is a space where we have just real free license to talk about traditional business and all of the great kind of keystone practices and principles and elements of business that support us so well, but also to bring in the mystic side, the business alchemy side, perhaps the divine feminine side. So you'll experience right off the bat that this format for the salon kind of honors that and follows that. We do a little bit of traditional energy and a little bit that's going to feel a little bit new, a new paradigm. I have a tiny bit of news that I want to cover just very quickly, but mostly I'm going to point you to the newsletters because, like I said, I want to get onto the guest at hand and the topic at hand, and then we will bring our minds together briefly as well. So in terms of our topics for today, so this is a topic that I could not be more passionate about. We're talking about new paradigm leadership, how that weaves with divine feminine leadership. We have a guest that I could not be more excited about, Elizabeth McLaughlin, who joins us today to talk about leadership, which she's not only passionate about as well, but she is modeling on a grand scale. She has taken incredible steps in her own life to blend a very traditional masculine background with powerfully feminine leadership in new ways. And not only that, create a platform for other women, create programs for other women to begin claiming their own light as well. So I honestly cannot imagine anyone more aligned to be with us as a guest today. So I'm so grateful for your presence. In terms of news, I just want to let people know that we are at that threshold point where we are beginning to release information about the 2016 programming for both the Mystic Society and the Masterminds. I'm starting to get some questions. I'm kind of holding the tide back a little bit because we really want to have some of the more of the ducks in a row before we put up the new calendar and put up the new topics. So I want to refer you to the main mailing list. If you are not a Mystic Society member, that's where you will learn all about the new pricing that will commence on December 8th, where you will see our topic schedule, where you'll be able to see our guests and all of the all the programmatic shifts that are going on with the Mystic Society. They are they're exciting, and I can't wait to release them. And then I will point you to the portal itself and as well your weekly newsletter if you are in the Mystic Society, so that you can hear more about the changes afoot and also learn more about referral gifts and how you can be you can be a part of oh, we are viewing Rebecca's screen. How did that happen? Interesting. Let's see if we can stop viewing Rebecca's screen. I'm kind of baffled at how that's even happening. Elizabeth, you are also seeing Rebecca's screen?
Yeah,
everyone is seeing somebody else's screen. There
you are. You're back.
We're not even in retrograde. How exciting. And so, yes, just to sum up kind of the news, we're not really going to dive into the what's coming pieces. I'm going to refer you to the newsletter so we can get started right away. So for bringing our minds together today, I don't know if you have a crystal with you, but I bet a lot of you do. Elizabeth and I were both already kind of showing who showed up with us today. I've got a labradorite palm stone here. But I really want to invite you to close your eyes for a moment, connect into either that crystal in your hand, but also into your, if you don't have one, in your mind's eye, perhaps into a color or an element or a stone that really resonates for you. Come into your breath. I can feel my own breath accelerate. I'm going to invite it to slow down. And from that place of awareness into your breath, bring your awareness down into your connection to the earth. Feel your roots down into the earth and maybe even send them a little bit deeper. In your mind's eye, invite them to uncurl or unfurl and go a little bit deeper. And it's from this place of our breath and our grounding that I would like to acknowledge and call in and give gratitude to the 8 mystic directions, starting with that direction beneath our feet, the earth, and the way We are held to her from our very first moment of coming into being with this promise that we will always be held to her. We don't have to do anything or try, but just by our very birthright, we are held abundantly in her embrace. And I give gratitude and thanks and invite the energies of the earth. I want to invite and give thanks to the etheric energies and the cosmos and beyond, and that place of infinite potential, but also oneness, giving a nod to our oneness across the miles right now. Also calling our attention now to the inner space. Almost exactly opposite, if you bring your awareness back down from the cosmos and back down from the ethers and into that inner space within you, where you are the prism of the light, where your cells are actually the container for the magic. This is the inner space, the space of the alchemy and the transformation. I give gratitude and thanks to that inner space within all of us. Gratitude and thanks to the direction that connects us all, to the technology, to the time that you created, to all the many ways that the universe conspired that you could be here with us and a part of this conversation. Gratitude and thanks to the cardinal directions, the east, the south, the west, and the north, and all the many ways that they support us in calibrating our way into our divine path and purpose. And a blanket of gratitude out in all directions for anyone or anything else that any of you may have thought of, maybe I thought of and didn't speak. All of that brought into this container of oneness of mind and connection as a really safe and beautiful basket in which for us to have this candid and open and honest conversation about leadership and what it means to step into our light. So from this place, I invite you to open your eyes. If you're still feeling a little bit of your morning or earlier parts of your day, or if you're already feeling called to the end of your day, I want to invite you to set that aside. And maybe that literally means turning off your notifications, or maybe it just means in your mind's eye, setting aside any distractions. But it's a true blessing to have you here today, Elizabeth. And I want to turn it over to you for a moment, now that we're all in oneness of mind, to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your own journey from very traditional mainstream into new paradigm leadership.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm having a lot of fun kind of telling this story lately, I should say, because it's changing every day. You know, as leadership often does, it's like malleable and fluid, especially new paradigm feminine leadership. So I really appreciate the opportunity. So for those of you who don't know me, I started out my professional career as a lawyer on Wall Street. And I worked for some of the largest law firms in the country. Ended my legal career, my full-time legal career, because I still dabbled for a few years after I actually left Wall Street full-time, with a firm that's one of the oldest law firms in the nation. It goes back to like 1887. And while I was there, you know, represented companies like Goldman Sachs, and the law firm itself was notorious for being very male-dominated. My experience there in the law generally was that it was particularly non-welcoming to women who were, really aligned in any way with any alternative purpose other than the purpose of the law firm. And for me, I was a trial lawyer. I did securities litigation. I was in court all the time, and I very much enjoyed the courtroom time. There was something about, presenting and making a case and having it all kind of be on me and how I shared information that I found very valuable. But for about the last 7 years that I was practicing full-time, I was really flat out miserable. And I was working, 85 to 90 hour weeks. I was making very, very good money. But the only balance that came in my life, honestly, was from yoga. And I discovered my mother had actually been a yoga teacher when I was a little kid. And so I had been introduced to yoga and meditation very early. But shortly after 9/11, I came back to it as a regular practice. And the way that I kind of survived my last 7 years on Wall Street was by throwing myself into an incredibly rigorous yoga practice, and also starting to really explore things that had always been compelling to me. So I'm somebody who, this isn't usually public information. I love that I get to share this, but I'm somebody who's been clairaudient since I was a very little kid. And I can remember being in the backseat of my mother's car when I was maybe 6 years old, and knowing that the guy who had just filled up the gas tank in the car was about to walk up to the window and say, that's $13.60 or whatever it was. And hearing that over and over again in my head. And then lo and behold, the guy walks up to the window and that's exactly what he said. And that's my first recollection of being aware that I had, something else going on that I couldn't really explain, right? And being a little bit wigged out by it, but also knowing, my mother was very hippie trippy, and I didn't really talk about it, but, there was at least room for the fact that, there might be kind of alternative options going on there in terms of sensory awareness. So I wasn't panicked by it initially, but I will say that my father is very driven. He was an entrepreneur his whole life, and he very much valued education. And so as the oldest child in our family, and someone who, he had me IQ tested at 3 at the University of Pennsylvania. Like, he was very, very driven toward our family's success. He was the first person in his family who graduated from college. And so, I was a triple major in my undergraduate college. Granted, one of them was in creative writing, and I was a poet, and I had a lot of, creative energy that was directed toward really wonderful things. But then I went on to law school, and I initially went to law school because I wanted to advocate on behalf of women's issues. I had been a really active feminist with the Community Women's Center at my college, and had done a lot of public advocacy and the like. And so I went to law school and very quickly discovered that there isn't a lot of room for that in the law, frankly, especially if you're somebody who took out $150,000 in student loans to go to law school. And so that's the path of how I ended up on Wall Street. But as I said, the thing that kind of got me through the last few years of it, was really starting to explore this alternative world within myself and without myself. And right around the time that I really sank deeply into kind of like the Wall Street world and got aligned with this very, very powerful law firm, it was ironically enough right around the same time that I met this incredible teacher who I started working with, who taught me everything that I now know about crystals and Reiki and intuitive readings and tarot and all these other things that I do on the side that I don't really talk about much as an executive coach, but that, really in reality inform everything about my daily existence. And so around 2008, I had met the person I ended up marrying. I'd met my husband, and sort of recognized that I couldn't really keep going on the schedule that I was on if I wanted to have a family. And I was really burnt out. I was just tired. It had been, 15 years of nonstop flying around the country and under enormous amounts of pressure and handling these cases that were like $350 million a pop. And it was just too much. And I had a miscarriage, and, there was just a lot going on. And so I entered a coaching training program, thinking that, I'd worked with a coach myself, thinking that at the very least, this was going to be another thing I did on the side that would be of interest to me. And I had just finished my 6-month coaching program, when my boss at the law firm walked into my office and said, well, you survived the first 4 rounds of layoffs, and there's another one coming. And this was like 2 days before Christmas. And in the meantime, my husband was back in school for culinary education, and, we were trying to have a kid. And he said, so there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that chances are very high that 6 months from now, your name is going to be on the chopping block. The good news is that you have a choice here, and you can either decide whether you want to work out those 6 months, or you can opt into the layoff, and we'll give you a very nice severance package, and you have time to think about it, and you can go on to do what I know. And, my boss was very gracious about this because he knew I wasn't terribly happy. You can go on to do something else. And so, at the time, I sort of like cried and, got a little freaked out and was like, here I am, I'm the sole earner for my family. My husband's in school. I'm trying to have a baby. What am I going to do without this enormous salary that I've gotten very aligned with and used to? But it was really honestly only a matter of a couple of weeks before I realized that I was sort of being handed this enormous gift that, in the way that the universe does, sometimes we need a really good kick in the pants to get going in the direction that we're supposed to be in. Mm-hmm. And this was it. So I opted into the severance package about 2 months after my boss gave me the option, and I was off and running and started my coaching practice right away. Immediately had a very big following amongst Wall Street lawyers, women in particular. And then from there, got pregnant with my first kid almost right away, got pregnant with the second kid 6 months after my daughter was born, and simultaneously was in the process of growing this, what became very rapidly an enormous executive coaching practice in New York City. And so in the 5 or 6 years since then, I now work with people all over all sectors of commerce. I have clients in London and Panama City and Asia and all over the world, Kuala Lumpur. And I have also been working on a couple of other sort of passion projects. So 40% and Rising is my organization for women who are primary breadwinners. 40% of American households now are headed by a woman who is the primary or sole earner for her family. And that's really kind of a little bit of an activist movement as well as a community for women who are sole or primary breadwinners. And then the most recent thing that I'm working on, which I'm so excited about and just like it's like every aspect of me kind of aligned with it, is the Gaia Project for Women's Leadership, which is in its beta program for the month of October. And Lindsay's one of our guests for that, which is awesome. Which is really about teaching women and leading women and leading as a collective of women toward a new paradigm of feminine leadership that really incorporates fundamentally divine feminine principles, and also kind of invites in sacred masculine, a new version of masculine leadership that aligns very well with divine feminine. And it covers everything from, what your vision of your own leadership is in the world and what gifts you want to bring to those around you, whether that's your leadership as a mother or your leadership as the head of a corporation, or for that matter, your leadership as the head of a country, as well as, the welcoming in of new ways of doing business that really align with holistic values and a sense of purpose and don't require us to kind of kill ourselves to get ahead, but really are much more grounded in the idea that as a collective, we all have something to offer. And when we're aligned with our highest gifts, we're operating in the best capacity that we can as leaders. And so we're in the beta for that now. We have another brief beta coming up in November and December on up-leveling your public profile. And then we're launching a extended 6-month program for women's leadership in January. That's going to be really in-depth, and we have some incredible heavy hitters lining up for that. I'm so excited to share when the time is right. But we've got some incredible guest experts and teachers coming on board for that. And yeah, I'm just thrilled with it. I mean, it feels like, it's felt this way since I left Wall Street, honestly. Like I'd felt since I was a little girl, like there was a purpose in the world for me, and that I was meant for big things, and I was meant to change the world in really fundamental ways. And the entire time I was on Wall Street, I felt like I was banging my head against a wall, like not being able to figure out what that was. And really the last 6 years have been extraordinary and difficult and full of struggle in some ways, and also incredibly exciting. And I wouldn't trade them for anything, because every day I get up and help people and work to uplift women and to uplift myself, because all of that work is conducted in reflection. And I just am, very, very aligned with who I am right now, and hoping to kind of be a part of the process that really takes women's leadership to the next level.
Well, you are certainly doing that. And it's not surprising that you're seeing such rapid expansion, and this vacuum really was created, and you have opened up these doors, and programs being created in masterminds. I mean, we were saying before we came on live that it's in the ethers right now. If you're not aligning to your path, purpose, and light, it's starting to get pretty uncomfortable for you. And pieces of your story, I'm sure, resonate with everyone. The pieces around, I've known, that's what most modern mystics, I have that piece of like, I've known that there was something in me. Mm-hmm. I can tell the pieces of my journey where I haven't been in alignment. And then if I didn't listen, the universe probably kicked my butt a little bit to get to where I needed to be. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've been challenged with, as I myself have stepped forward into hosting conversations about new paradigm leadership, is it or is it not feminism? And how is it different? And what is feminism today? And on the one hand, part of me feels like the conversation can be a huge distraction away from looking forward into our leadership. On the other hand, I feel like it needs to at least be spoken. And yeah. I wonder if you'd be willing to share your thoughts on where feminism fits in today.
Yeah, well, and it's a really great question. And I will candidly admit that I identify as a feminist and always have. At the same time, however, I will say that I think one of the things that we forget often is that feminism is actually a very diverse set of movements and structures that come together under one rubric. And just like any other political movement, or for that matter, spiritual path, there's many different arteries under that rubric, right? There's radical feminism, and there's, feminism that is oriented toward women in the workplace. And then there's, feminism that's very anti-porn. And there's, there are all different incarnations of that. And, to me, feminism at its highest is really just about lifting women up to a place of understanding what's divine about feminine energy, and drawing that in and appreciating difference fundamentally. And of course, and I'm a lawyer, you can get me started on this and I'll talk for hours, but it's about ending discrimination and having equal pay and, understanding family leave and, providing for holistic views of what families need, both for mothers and for fathers and for alternative partnerships and everything else that goes along with it. But in the context of, all that said,
yes,
in the context of a kind of alignment of feminine leadership, I think my view of it is that, there is a difference between advocating for, new paradigm leadership and advocating for feminism or for feminist causes. And I think there's a value in both. Absolutely. But I do think that there is a bit of a danger in the way that we talk about, new feminine leadership because it can be threatening, I guess is the way to put it. And I've often been accused of being like one of those overly empowered, too threatening women in corporate environments. Even when I go in to teach in hedge funds and places like that, scale back my view of how I talk about this, not because I'm dumbing it down, but because I'm interested in the reception. And so one of the things that I do there is that I really, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I'm a really big advocate of nonviolent communication principles that were founded by Marshall Rosenberg in the 70s and 80s. And the way in which we communicate our needs and our wants often predict whether or not they're going to be met. And I think that there's a lot to be said about going in and saying, this is what I feel, this is what I value, this is my reaction when I see or hear this from you as the person on the other side of the table. What do you think are the solutions for that? Or how can we meet each other in the middle? Because the other thing that I think we forget often is that it's not us against them when it comes to a paradigm of new feminine leadership, right? In fact, the dominant masculine model, the patriarchal model of doing business hurts men as much as it hurts women. And, one of the things that I consider a lot, having had a husband who's been a stay-at-home dad for the last 3.5 years and just went back to work in June, is that, he has been taught his whole life that his only value is in whether or not he makes money. And that does something to the sacred masculine that is really not healthy. Because men can be extraordinary caregivers and they can be extraordinary child rearers. And when opened up to the possibility of being in their whole masculine selves, they bring to the table amazing gifts, just like we do when we're kind of aligned with our best feminine selves, understanding that, nobody's talking in essentialist terms here, right? Again, we've got like a vast breadth of feminine qualities, and I believe we all contain like the masculine and the feminine in different balances at different moments in our lives. But my view is that the moment that we get either or, rather than looking holistically and thinking about how to communicate so that we're heard, we undermine our own leadership, frankly. That part of being on the cutting edge of this, however much we might not like it, is that we do have to be very mindful of the way in which we ask for what we want and what we believe we deserve, so that it's heard and so that it is received from the place, I believe, for most of us, from which it's intended, which is a desire for greater alignment for the whole, for men, for women, for everybody, for families, so that we can start to really see collective shifts across the spectrum and not just the kind of thing of, oh, well, we're going to give women more family leave, because then, for instance, that becomes a point of discrimination. Whereas if we give family leave to everyone, yes, and then start taking more family leave, that undermines the ability to discriminate against working mothers. Yes. And that's just one example of how, when we're aligned with the holistic properties that everybody needs and wants, frankly, we're much more likely to get to an end result that benefits the whole.
I think that's part of why I feel so connected to and resonant with your message is I feel that desire to strike a balance and to bring everyone into balance, as opposed to somehow dub one gender or one anything priority or rights over another. And in the way that you kind of tapped into one of the key wounds for the sacred masculine, that thing of, can I step into my nurturing side? Can I also be compassionate? We see a similar gaping wound on the feminine side around the money.
Yes.
So I think it's fascinating that you have really stepped forward into your own light and leadership from a place where you're talking about wage, where you're talking about compensation, where you're not afraid to talk about money. Because many, many women I've seen have been willing to take the courageous step to take the leap or to align to their truth and light. But then there's somehow this thing of I'm abdicating a belief that I can make money, or I'm abdicating this feeling that I can be compensated fairly. Tell me a little bit about your own relationship and philosophy around money and how that fits in with new paradigm leadership.
Oh my gosh, Sky, that is like such a Pandora's box, and I'm perfectly happy to open it. But let me do it first from the collective, and then I'll do more personal. Okay.
Sure.
So I am a really big believer that shame around money is one of the number one factors that keeps women from getting paid what they're worth. And there are these studies out there that show that only 7% of women who are college graduates negotiate their salaries for their first job out of college. And that in and of itself, on average, costs women more than $500,000 over the course of their careers. So, learning to advocate for yourself for money is, in my view, one of the most critical skills that any working woman needs these days. And
that was me, by the way. I'll just say to everyone, my first offer letter from Anderson Consulting, which, was way back in the day. Mm-hmm. I just thought I was so over the moon to get there. Yeah. It never even occurred to me to push back and say, hey, wait a minute, or what will my peers be making, or even to think about it for months after I was there.
Right. Yeah. And whereas, something like upwards of 70% of men come back with a counteroffer. And, and there's some discussion about, how much of the pay gap is that responsible for, right?
Right.
There is some that's obviously responsible for overt discrimination, but also when we don't negotiate, we start from a lower place to begin with. And that starting salary follows us throughout our careers because we're necessarily one step below if we're not negotiating for what our peers are making. So that's one factor that I think is really important. I also think that this whole thing about how we don't talk about money and we don't talk about sex, I'm not on that front either. And I'm a very big believer that pay transparency is one of the most important factors for equality in corporate America at this point with regard to pay. This idea that you can't talk about what you make, first of all, in most states is not enforceable from a legal standpoint. So even if your employer is saying, don't talk about it, they can't retaliate against you if you do. Legally anyway. But the flip side of it is that, obviously if you know that the guy sitting in the cubicle next to you is making $50,000 more a year than you do, the chances are good that you're not just going to sit still and do nothing with that. So one of the things that I've been talking to kind of C-level women about who I coach and who are in my programs and who are even colleagues of mine, is the need to really take proactive action, by women in leadership positions, senior positions in corporate America and their allies to have pay transparency across the board in their corporations. And, Mark Benioff, who's a huge, the head of Salesforce, who's a huge advocate for diversity and equality kind of across the tech sector, just went ahead and reviewed all 16,000 salaries of his employees to make sure that women were being paid fairly as compared to their male compatriots in the same tiers. And he's willing to do that. And that's really what it takes, I think, is that kind of leadership and willingness to step into the tough issues to start to kind of rectify things. But my own money story is very interesting and very kind of up and down, I was raised in a family where, my father was the only earner. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and my father gradually became a more and more successful entrepreneur as we were growing up, and my mother spent all of his money. Took out credit cards without telling him about it. There were fights in the household all the time about money, and even instances where my father made us take back Christmas presents because my mother had spent too much money. And there's a lot of really, in some ways I look back at my two biological parents who are not married anymore, and I see the hugest dichotomy of financial awareness that you could imagine. My father retired at 59 with multiple millions of dollars in the bank and has never had to go back to work and is, 74 now and well into retirement, travels the world and, is incredibly well established. And the only thing my mother ever knew how to do is spend. And she is in her retirement in a very different position, and still working, honestly, at the age of 68, because she's probably going to have to work until the end of her life, unfortunately. So, I entered into my own relationship with money, honestly, avoiding it, I think is probably the best way to put it. And so one of the things that meant was that when I was making huge money on Wall Street, I spent a lot of it. And I do think that there was a part of me that, from a value perspective, felt sort of smarmy about the work that I was doing part of the time. And so my relationship to the money I was earning was like, well, this is the trade-off that I get for killing myself for this job where I'm not happy. So I deserve to go out and buy $1,000 pairs of shoes and go out to dinner every night in New York City and, run up these enormous credit card bills because I get this huge bonus that I can pay it off in the end of the year, and never really developed, you know, and it's interesting to think about it now from where I sit now, because I don't think I really had the sense of longevity and enough of a kind of picture of my own value over time to think I should be saving for the future. I should be in a position where I'm investing in myself for the long haul. It was very, and you know, this was Wall Street in the 90s also. So it was very like, and into the 2000s, it was very, very hot, fast, quick. Everybody was rolling in money there, you know, and you had the sense you'd go out and you'd be like, there's no reason why I can't have that $200 bottle of wine. And you would do that. And I don't regret any of those experiences. I look back on it now and I say, okay, that was also my education, right? Was having these wonderful experiences and doing this incredible travel. You know, when I met my husband and we were dating, I was like, let's go to Bali for New Year's. And we hopped on a plane for 3 weeks because I could afford to do that, you know, and that was great. And then when I left Wall Street, it was very different. You know, the first year I was in business, my coaching practice made 55 grand, which was, you know, a small fraction of what I had earned for the last 10 years, at least. And we blew through whatever savings I had. We blew through our retirement because I got pregnant and couldn't work on my business the way that I wanted to toward the end of it. And we ended up kind of fundamentally in a position of having to sort of start over again when I was about 38. And so, you know, it's a very different worldview now. And, you know, my business is incredibly successful, but I continue to refine and clear the kind of like remaining energetic blocks. It's an ongoing process for me. And I think honestly, it's part of my life's path that I'm supposed to kind of get to a place of being able to be very successful financially and also provide for myself for the long haul and my family in a way that's holistic, and it doesn't have panic or fear or poverty mentality, scarcity kind of attached to it as an automatic flip side, right? Like when's the other shoe going to drop? And so I'm working very hard these days. You know, again, my business is doing really well, like gangbusters in the last few months in particular, which is awesome. And we had our best year ever last year, and you know, every year has been better than the last. And, you know, running toward like mid 6 figures, hopefully without too much trouble at this point. But, you know, I do have to always be careful of those triggers that are sort of like the ancient wounds in me from my upbringing. And honestly, you know, I come from an immigrant family. My grandmother cleaned houses in Philadelphia under where I-95 now runs. My mother was born in a house in the Polish ghetto in Philadelphia. So I don't have a lot of generational DNA around success and financial stability. In fact, it's very much an immigrant poverty story on both sides of my family going all the way back. And so these are all new skills that I'm kind of having to learn. And I do feel like the thing that kind of is keeping me very grounded around it right now is a lot of tapping and a lot of meditation and a lot of trust. And that's honestly been the hardest thing for me from the perspective of being an entrepreneur and the kind of ups and downs that we all cycle through with it, you know, good months and bad months, is trusting that the universe has my back, and that when I'm on purpose and I'm doing my best work, that I'm provided for. Because even in my worst moments of panic, you know, I had a period earlier this year where for like 2 consecutive months, I think my business made like $1,900. And, you know, we're, you know, living in New York City, you know, 2 kids, a husband who's not working. You know, you can panic in moments like that, but we've never had a moment where the money didn't in the end show up when we needed it. And a lot of times it shows up in huge chunks and great abundance. And I'm learning to be appreciative of that and comfortable with that. And trust that that's the way that it's supposed to be, because honestly, it's when I begin to panic that it shrinks, because, you know, we're contracting, right? Yeah. So the more that we can stay expansive and open and trusting that the universe has us, and again, it's an ongoing process for me.
Definitely.
The better off I am.
And those patterns follow us. You know, you can track your income over the years and even decades, and people will often carry their pattern with them regardless of where they are on the spectrum. So if I can always just barely pay my bills, that's probably true even when you are making 50% of what you're making now. You're carrying that with you. So I'm always trying to encourage people to kind of step into the energy of what you're saying, which is come into a relationship, see where you are, move into trust. Because this is really just, it's a thumbprint for money in some ways, but it's also something you have the power to affect and to change. And Claire's on the call, and so, you know, she knows that this is something that I've been fascinated by. One of the and I kind of want to bring some of the concepts you said about the corporate experience into the entrepreneurial experience, which one is to shift away from thinking about flow, because that's actually a very corporate way to think things. We get this paycheck and there's this flow, and you're trying to extend the flow. You're trying to protect your job long term or whatever it is. In entrepreneurship, and as you step into your own leadership and become more self-responsible for your income in the long term, this idea, and I think Claire first came up with the term, was pooling. Like this visualization of money pooling around you. So it's a whole different feeling, right? All of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, even if something is a little bit off this month, if it's pooling around me, if there's reserves, if that's savings, if that's whatever it is that you set for yourself, you can make a minor tweak now, because you won't really feel that for 18 months or 2 years if there's enough pooling, or 6 months, or however much buffer you've put in.
Right.
So lots of your story kind of speaks to that shift from this idea of, we're just kind of collecting the paycheck and we're in the pattern, to we're allowing for a new paradigm, we're allowing this pooling. But you also touched on something that I think is really key, and it relates not only in the corporate world, but in entrepreneurship, and that is the asking. And obviously in the corporate world, it's part about negotiating. It's part about standing up and speaking for transparency. It's a part of going in and speaking your worth. And again, they're combined again all of a sudden, your worth and your income.
Yep.
But on the entrepreneurship side, that can mean everything from, do I increase my rates or not? Or is it okay even to charge XYZ for what I do? How do you help women kind of move through that, how worth is connected to your income and how to not settle?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And honestly, I was coaching a client this morning. There are no coincidences, we know that, but I was coaching a client this morning where this exact issue came up, where she was like, I just don't, I'm afraid to kind of ask for, X, because, I priced my program at $19 a person because I was afraid no one would pay more than that. And, I hear that a lot, frankly, when I'm coaching entrepreneurs, and it's distressing to me, because I think, part of my role in the world is that I see what people can do, and I see the differences that they can make in other people's lives by stepping completely into who they are. It's one of the things that I think honestly makes me pretty good at what I do these days. But the thing that has to be overcome in that is the idea that somehow who you are and the gifts that you innately have as you cultivate them and you grow isn't of value, right? That like, if we're not in the traditional corporate world and serving in the way, like I had a client this morning who was like, maybe I should just go to medical school. And I was like, why would you do that when you know that the thing that you're dying to do is like run a cosmetics company that helps women feel beautiful? Why would you do that? So I think some of it is understanding that our gifts have value, and it's about like shifting the paradigm of what creates our value, right? For me, it's been very much, and honestly, this is very recent. It's only in the last 6 months that I've really come into a place where I personally have great confidence in my ability to provide for my family for the rest of my life. There's been so many ups and downs in my business that, even I have been in places, when I've had $20,000 months where I'm going like, I don't know, is this going to last? Right. And you have to be in a place of understanding that the value that you bring to the table, the value you have as a human being, the value you have as a leader is not equated to the amount of money that people are paying you, but simultaneously that if you know your own value, the money will come.
Yes.
And to me, when I talk about rates with people in particular, since you asked about that, I find the rate setting thing to be pretty intuitive. Once you're past the kind of like personal baggage around whether or not you deserve to charge a certain amount, I think the last time I raised my rates was about 18 months ago. And I really don't have any desire to go any higher than I am right now in my private coaching rates, because I'm at a point where I get some pushback from people, but they will usually buy in if it feels like it's the right alignment. And I think if it was higher, there would be more of a struggle with that. And so I'm staying where I am because the right clients are showing up at the right time, and intuitively it doesn't feel right. But I have raised my rates probably about 4 times since I started my business. At moments where it was a year since the last time I did it and I felt like that was necessary, or where my profile had gotten bigger, or where, for that matter, I didn't want to take on as many clients. And I knew that I needed to get, I really only work with 20 private clients at once because anything else burns me out. And right now it's less than that because I have this huge program going on. And so, my value, my rates, in accordance with that changed when I lowered the number of clients I was willing to take on because I needed to keep my income as a baseline. But I do think once you're past the personal worth part of it, it actually becomes pretty clear. Like, in your gut what your market is, what people can afford, what they align with. And the other thing I'll say, which, I've said before, and I know you believe, is that when you undercharge yourself, you attract clients who don't value your work in the same way. So when you hit that sweet spot of charging what you know you're worth and what you know you deserve, you attract clients who don't hesitate to put the money down. And who know that you're worth the money, right? I mean, like, I had a much harder time attracting quality clients when I was, charging $250 an hour than where I am now. And I got a lot of people who would be late on their payments, or, things would bounce. And, the more aligned I got with, like, the methodology through which I work and how I take payments from my clients, and the fact that I don't discount, all of that lined up with the clients that I love to work with.
And I'll add my signature Lindsay third door, which is part of what I've loved about getting to the place where I'm really happy with where my rates are and how much I equate for the journey that I take people on, is that it gives me tremendous freedom to actually create a sliding scale when I want to, when I want to gift something, when I want to make a clear energetic exchange. And some of the most beautiful gifts have come through that ability. And so I really like to encourage you not to think, I guess the piece that you described that resonated so much was the right people are finding me. That's the piece that you're like, I'm enjoying who I'm working with. It's a good fit. And my rates afford me the freedom to make the kind of choices I want to make in my business, which is huge. You touched on another one, which is huge, and I know it's a big reason a lot of women are on the call today, which is not only is our income and our financial profile connected to our worth, as you touched on, but it is connected to our profile. And stepping into our own light and claiming our leadership is one of the most edgy things I see for people. And they go hand in hand. Sometimes, like you described, our profile expands and we realize we want to bring our rates up to match them, but sometimes we actually have to move forward and claim a new level of profile for ourselves in order to do that. And that's something you're particularly skilled at coaching women to do, but you've also modeled so beautifully for us. Can you tell us a little bit about that profile piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this was very interesting for me in my own personal process, because there was a point about a year ago now where, from a profile perspective, things really exploded for me. I got introduced through I have a C-level client in tech who introduced me to Ivanka Trump. Or actually, the way that it started was he offered to introduce me to Ivanka Trump, and I said, wait 3 months until I'm sure that I'm ready, because I wanted to make sure that my platform and, I was in the middle of a website redesign, and everything that I was doing from a marketing standpoint was ready for what was going to come if my working relationship with her developed the way that I wanted it to. But what I will say about it was that it had been, 3 or 4 years at that point of getting to a place of being confident that I deserved a seat at a table that big. And, I've done a lot of my own personal work around that. And it doesn't hurt that, when I was on Wall Street, I was walking with, some of the biggest titans of industry on a regular basis, and had already gotten comfortable at very high levels of quote unquote power, traditional power, right? But the expanding my profile, honestly, came mostly for me through just really effective networking. And it was something that I had to learn to do and be confident about and not be afraid of my ask. And also, and I will say, I feel like this is the most important part. Really beyond the first 6 months that I did this, I didn't have any hesitation describing myself as an expert. Granted, I've kind of been coaching people my whole life. And so, I did it. I was known in my law firm for being the person who everybody came to with their career problems. So even before I was officially, coaching for a living, it had always been my gift. And so, and I had also been trained in law school to counsel people. So, there were ways in which there was a kind of fundamental synergy that I didn't have a lot of insecurity about my capacity to do it. But I do think there was something that had to happen where I had to recognize that, that I was going to have to stretch myself, in terms of my capacity to, it's funny because I'm getting this mental image about this, so I'll just share it. This is what it felt like. It felt like I had to be willing to take a very deep inhale that almost stretched my lungs to the point where I thought they would bust. And meaning that, like, I had to feel like I had the energy and the light and the power to fill a room, and stand in a room with people who had that same degree of energy and authenticity and authority and generosity, honestly. And every time that it happened, like when I got introduced to Ivanka Trump, or Ariana Huffington, got on the phone with me or email with me and set up, our private blog stream on HuffPost. And, being interviewed on Allie Brown's podcast. There's a lot of different moments over the course of the last, I'd say 18 months in particular, where every time there's this huge inhale, and then I get used to that space, right? And once you've stepped into that space, then the next question is, well, where's the next inhale, and where's the next inhale? And not that you're looking for it, but it comes, and you have to get used to it, and it's not always a comfortable adjustment. But it is about recognizing that, oh, I can stand here. And maybe it's intimidating, when you're on the phone for the first time with, somebody who you've, seen in Vanity Fair magazine or whatever. But at the same time, once you've done it, it's not so scary, and it becomes a level of comfort with your own light is really the only way to put it. You have to be comfortable standing in your own light. And I will also say sometimes you just have to get the guts to do it. That's the other thing. It's like I'm not a tough love coach in the sense that like I push people when they're not ready, but I will encourage them to really, stretch to a place that feels good without feeling painful. Kind of like in yoga, right? You want to stretch yourself to the point where you're expanding your possibility, but not to where you're kind of like pulling a hamstring muscle. And the extent to which we can expand our view of ourselves and our belief in what we can be, and also accept in the reflection of that. So that's one of the things that's really interesting just about working with Ivanka generally, and especially now that we're friends, is that when she sees something about me in the press, or she's like, she got an email this morning. I was just emailing with her this morning. She got an email this morning from 100 women in hedge funds where I'm going to be speaking at the end of the month. She wrote back to me and said, oh, I'm so wonderful that this has worked out for you. And, she had introduced me to the head of them because she used to sit on the board. I'm just so glad that you were able to kind of cultivate this, because all she did was send an email. I'm so glad you were able to cultivate this into, a great speaking opportunity for you and another opportunity to meet women in your target market. So she reflects back that I belong there also. And that's something that really great leaders do, is they reflect back to other people their own capacities to lead. Yes. And you have to get comfortable taking that in, not saying, oh, it's nothing, right? Saying thanks, thanks for seeing me. Thanks for appreciating me. And without saying it out loud, and that's welcome, right? Like I welcome that vision and that being seen and that witnessing, because that also helps you grow.
Absolutely. I want to ask about how you get the support that you need, but as you're talking about the profile piece in particular, I want to encourage people to think about who around you is doing that kind of reflection for you, who around you is offering that kind of light, and letting yourself do exactly what Elizabeth described, which is soak that in, say yes, thank you, and more please. We have Erica on the call today, and she was certainly one of those people for me. And at an kind of edgy time for myself where my profile was expanding and there was kind of an instinctive protection that wanted to contract, which is not the same as an inhale. I love how you gave us that. Inhale actually causes you to expand. We're holding our breath almost when we contract. But Erica was one of the ones who could kind of say, no, I see this for you. I believe in this for you, and make some fundamental pieces of my own exposure happen. So I love the idea that, when Ivanka offers you this reflection, it's that thing of sometimes someone has your back too when you can't fully necessarily claim it for yourself or do the big ask. And then you can take that inhale to where you match that vibration. If that is something you're struggling with, get support for sure. And Erica with VA Creatively is here today too. So think about reaching out to her. But where did you get that support on those where did that profile support come for you?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good question. So, I have, I just have an amazing tribe of women around me, and it's growing every day. One of the things that, and it's interesting because I've had a study in contrast with this in the last couple of years. Both my kids are under the age of 4, and there was a chunk of time where, particularly after my son was born, my second child was born, where for about a year, I was more or less a hermit. I worked on my business. I had a home office. I wasn't out of the house very much. And even though my husband was a stay-at-home dad, we had somebody who came in and gave him a break for like 3 hours a day, but I was kind of like holed up doing my thing, and I didn't get out very much. And one of the things that I realized was that by not being around the women who are in my life and who support me and who do that reflection, and, some of them have been in my life for 20 years, I kind of lost sight of myself for a little while there, and there were moments of panic, and I could feel fear creeping back in. sort of moments of like, how am I going to handle all of this? You know, and particularly when my son was a newborn and I was still nursing and my daughter was only a year and a half old. And like, you know, you get into this place of like, there's so much on my plate and I'm the only person who's providing for my family. And so like, you know, the whole kind of, you know, cluster F of it, so to speak, was really very intense at that moment in time. And what it did was it made me revalue, you know, reaching out and having really powerful friendships with women. And one of the things that's been particularly interesting for me just in the last few months is that, you know, in the moments that have been bumpy, because we all have them, you know, one of the things that I think that really honestly has allowed me to get through some, frankly, very tough shit in my life, because, you know, I didn't have the easiest of childhoods and there's a lot of stuff there, is simply that when I get to a place where things feel unsteady, I reach out. And that may mean, you know, messaging you. It may mean, you know, seeking out new friendships if I need them. You know, in the last 3 months in particular, I've had these 3 extraordinary women come into my life, and I'm 44 years old. You know, you get to a point where you're kind of like, maybe I'm not making any new friends. Wrong. You know, there's amazing women out there. And, you know, the other thing is that I'm a big believer in calling it in. So the irony about these 3 women who are now great, new, wonderful, empowered, and they're like each like dynamic titans of their professions and doing incredible things in the world, is that, you know, you can call people in. And all 3 of them this year, I didn't do this, but they did it, you know, sat down at the beginning of the year and were like, I don't have enough girlfriends. Like, this is the year where I'm calling in like a new clan of people, a new clan of women who are, you know, at the top of their game and, you know, working through their stuff and ready to be supportive of other women in every way, business, life, spiritually. And, you know, the 4 of us are like, we're kind of like a tribe right now. It's really cool. And, you know, I will say also that my longer term friends, I have friends who I don't talk to for 6 months at a time, but I get on the phone with them and we're just like this. And I feel like that's the thing that kind of keeps me going. You know, my husband is not terribly woo. You know, he values what I do with it and he's occasionally interested. But he's on his own trip and that's totally fine. Yeah. But I do really feel like the thing that grounds me are, the really powerful, amazing women in my life who I can lean on, yourself included. And also, as well, honestly, my practices. Because when I fall down on my practices, you know, stuff gets bad, you know, like, I mean, I've only really, honestly, recently, it's maybe been in the last year and a half that I've been tapping regularly. And when I don't tap, my anxiety goes up and like, I just don't get grounded. And so I need, you know, and the great thing about that as a practice is you can do it in 30 seconds a day, but it has such a massive difference in the flow of your own energy. So I love that. And, you know, I do meditation now every night before bed. I'm back on that practice, which is amazing. And so that keeps me very grounded. And then honestly, the only other really big thing that's kind of come into my awareness in the last 6 months, is that I need to, one of the things I've realized about myself is my profile has gotten bigger and what I'm doing has gotten bigger in the world, is that if I don't actually consciously take time to empty out, to get rid of all the excess energy that I'm carrying around from other people, or, you know, as somebody who's deeply intuitive, if I don't do energy cleaning and energy protection work, and I don't, like, you know, one day a week when I really need it, lay down and take a 2-hour nap when my kids are with my mother-in-law, you know, I burn out really fast. And I've actually started to reframe that time as part of my work. So that if I have a day blocked out, you know, like today, like I have 7 calls today. If I have a day blocked out like today, there's an hour in the schedule where I'm doing nothing, you know, just as a way of recharging my battery. And that may mean I lay down on my couch for half an hour. It may mean that I just take time to nourish my body really well. It may mean that I do a half-hour yoga practice, but it's part of my work. Like, I can't be good at what I do unless I take that. And so that's also something that has been, you know, especially in recent months, incredibly critical.
That self-care and core routines and sister support. What a great set of recommendations there. Well, there were about 300 amazing sound bites in this hour. I'm going to go back and listen to it myself and rewrite them down. But I want to invite everyone who was listening today to maybe share in Mystic Society group or in a message to Elizabeth or myself what really jumped out at you today? What was the soundbite or the concept or the epiphany that you had? We have just a few more minutes here, and I would like to invite a couple of questions. If anyone has a question, I would love to invite you to pop it or let me know in the chat, or even just go ahead and unmute yourself, and we'd love to hear your voice. I know we have some questions out there.
Hi, this is Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hey.
Hi. I have roots in Bridesburg too, Elizabeth. So I'm betting that's the Polish area that you're talking about. So one of the things I'm very interested in, thank you first of all for sharing so openly. I am part of the 40%.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I really try to pay attention to, but don't necessarily have the best practices, so I'm looking for that from you, is the toggling between the masculine and the feminine energies.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do work from home, at times my day job requires huge amounts of masculine energy, mm-hmm. and I weave in the feminine, and then I have, of course, my passions and my other part as an author and writer that tends to weave in more of the feminine. So do you have any suggestions, just being in the having lived in all these worlds, and it sounds like you have a similar situation, and I'm a mama of an 8-year-old too.
Yeah. Great question. And it's a question I get a lot from 40%ers, especially people who have to operate in a masculine environment all day long, and then either come home or open the office door to, motherhood, and kids who are demanding and needing to kind of really shift into kind of a more nurturing role. So there's a couple of things that I do and that I kind of recommend to people. The first is to make sure that you've at least got some kind of transition period between the end of your day and when you step back into your space with your family. So if for you, that may mean 15 minutes where you shut down the computer before you go out the door, mm-hmm. And taking a minute to kind of ground yourself and really like feel into your body and get, kind of aligned with what's coming next, just so you're like releasing the tension and the masculine energy of the day and preparing yourself to be more open to your child, which for me is a real trick because I come through the door and there's 2 toddlers who are usually screaming their head off at meltdown hour. So I get this completely. But the other thing I will say that I find particularly important is that we take some aspect of our self-care around reminding ourselves that we're women. And so for me, that may mean like I have these amazing bath salts that I get from Whole Foods that are like rose and geranium, and you get them in bulk, and you can get them in those wonderful like mason jars, right? Mm-hmm. And a couple of times a week, I need to just like call it out, put the kids to bed, and get in that bathtub and just like really luxuriate in the experience of my body and feeling good about myself. I went out last weekend and I bought all new underwear because I decided I wasn't wearing crappy underwear anymore, even if nobody ever sees it. Like I want to get up. I literally, and by the way, if anybody hasn't read Marie Kondo's book on the magic stuff of tidying up, like please do it. I condoed my whole closet a couple of weeks ago, and it's just like changed my life. Because this is the thing, like for many women who are working in masculine environments, what happens is that we put our own needs last, and they end up being backburnered to the needs of our jobs, and then our families, and then our partners, and then if we're lucky, our girlfriends, and then us. And to me, the danger of that is that we start to feel asexual. Like there's so many primary breadwinners I know who have sexless marriages and are really miserable about it. But part of that is because we're not taking the time to really tap into how we feel in our bodies as women. And I just, the whole thing about Kondo that was really revolutionary to me was the idea that like, I don't really want to wear anything that doesn't make me feel beautiful. Mm-hmm. I don't want to settle anymore for, even if I'm sitting at home, like I am today, and this is what I'm doing, I don't want to wear, I want to wear my awesome black bra with like the lace on it. You know what I mean? Like I want to know that I'm like in my feminine while I'm doing this work. Mm-hmm. Because it's a way of reminding myself that that's part of my power, right? Is being a woman and being in my feminine in the way that makes sense to me and aligns with what makes me feel good. So I think part of it is understanding your transitions, and part of it is also doing what you need to do to feel beautiful and to feel conscious in your own skin and to remember who you are on a daily basis in whatever way like deeply resonates with how you feel when you're in your most powerful feminine, and carrying that through. Nobody has to know that you've got great underwear on, I mean, but you do,
It'll show. It'll shine.
Yeah. Thank you. Sure. Well, absolutely. Pleasure.
We ended up really only with time for one question, but that one question was so divinely guided and perfect for really summarizing all of those key components of how we step into and claim our light and our leadership. And I think it really does kind of all boil down to what you just said, which is knowing what lights you up and doing that. So I want to thank you, Elizabeth, so very much for being with us today. I want to thank
you. Such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank everyone who came and everyone who listened. And I do want to encourage encourage you to go find Elizabeth online. 40% resonates with you. Get on the list. It's an incredible movement happening, but also the Gaia Project just is absolutely divine wings unfolding there. So,
and that's on my coaching website, just so everybody knows,
Great.
emclaughlin.com. You can learn more about the Gaia Project on my coaching site. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And we'll be sure to include the links with the replay as well. All right.
Great.
Well, much love to all of you. I separate our hearts and minds now so we can go forth and laugh our own laughs and dream our own dreams. And I will see you all online soon. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Love. Bye-bye.
Bye.